right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks so much for coming here today, which I think is a very important announcement we're making here. You know, in city government, our work ranges from the immediate to the long term. And when you think about the immediate work we do, it's the really pedestrian day-to-day things. You know, we pick up trash, we respond to a homicide, very important work. Then we have long-term work, you know, things about building a network of trauma-informed care, reimagining public safety. And then from time to time, we get to make a moral statement. And today, this afternoon, that is one of those times. The Metro Council and community debate around this reparations resolution was very interesting to watch because I think it encapsulated all of America just right here in our city. I hope that there is unanimous agreement around the horrors of enslaved people that came to America, were forced to come to America, and that the early wealth and mid-wealth of our country was built literally on the backs of those enslaved people. That is history, and we can't control that history. We can be ashamed of the history, but the last thing we should do is deny the history. And for far too long that's happened in this country, and primarily by people that have the skin color that I have. This resolution addresses a lot of those issues. This resolution is merely, importantly, but merely a statement of support for an existing congressional resolution, H.R. 40, and its companion bill, S. 40, that says that we should study the impact of enslaving people, primarily from Africa, again, that were forced through the Middle Passage to come to this country, to see what we should do about that. And there's certainly plenty of precedent in other countries that have done that, whether it's Canada with their indigenous people, here in this country with Jewish people, Japanese people, our indigenous people. So this is not an outlandish idea. It's just something that is long overdue in being discussed. Surely there can be agreement that grievous injustice has occurred, and that a moral society, a just society, a conscious society should discuss that and see what we can do to remedy those wrongs. The many racial gaps that we have in America today have their roots from this injustice, and these gaps cause us challenges time and time again in America. They're not right for people's ability to reach their full human potential, and people seem more than ready to put Band-Aids on them as opposed to making investments that can change the system and change the outcomes. Some of the debate is, how are we ever going to figure this out? What about this? What about that? That's not what this resolution is about. This resolution is about getting smart people to the table to address some of these very issues, to begin the discussion about righting historical wrongs. And I just believe that any thinking people that understand the history of our country would say, that's a really good idea, and it's really long overdue. And it's hurt our country from the first ship of enslaved people that came here in 1619 to today in 2021. So I'm really proud of the Council for passing this resolution. The 13th Amendment abolished slavery, but it did not eradicate systemic racism in the institutional structures that perpetuate it in our city and our country. And so we've got to address this, and we've got to take a look at it. So today, with the signing of the resolution, our city, and ratifying what the council led and signed, was not unanimous though. Today, Louisville is making a decisive statement away from what we own about this. Just blocks from here, slave trading blocks were up. We're on the Mason-Dixon line here. We had a very tortured past with slavery and the Civil War. So we own a lot of this as well in our city. We're not saying with this resolution that here's our plan and here's how we're going to pay for it. We're just merely saying this is a long overdue discussion that needs to be passed in Congress so a federal body can get to work on this. So our city resolution supports the congressional proposal known as H.R. 40, and as I said, its companion bill, S-40, to form a national commission to determine how slavery and discrimination have affected African Americans, is how they stated in the bill, to recommend appropriate remedies, including reparations. I, as you can tell, am in strong support of this. In fact, the first action I took as the president of the United States Conference of Mayors a little bit over a year ago was to lead and support a resolution to support H.R. 40, and it passed with almost unanimous support from the mayors of America. They knew, and we know, that we cannot measure our attempts just to do better with the past. I mean, you hear often, it's so much better now than what it used to be. That's an inadequate measuring stick. Whether it's the racial justice protest of last year or just plain common sense, we should not be measuring ourselves on just doing a little better. There needs to be breakthrough innovation in this effort so that we can move forward together as a country. It'll be better for everybody here in America. So this resolution would help that with our country and be followed, I'm sure, with great interest and have great debate amongst Americans, which would, I hope, help the soul of our country. So this signing today, I hope, puts Louisville squarely on the record of racial reconciliation and justice. It's long overdue for our country, so this is our contribution here in Louisville toward this great national debate that needs to be resolved. With that, I'd like to introduce Michael Meeks. Michael is our city's interim chief of equity, who's going to share a few thoughts with us. Michael?
Thank you, Mayor Fischer. In the words of President Biden, this is a really big deal. This resolution expresses support for reparations legislation and for H.R. 40, first introduced in 1989. That's 32 years ago. H.R. 40 would create a commission to study the effects of slavery and discriminatory policies on African Americans and recommend appropriate remedies, including reparations. But it's not only about Black American descendants of slaves, it's about America. It's about America and Americans setting out to deliberately right an historic wrong that's so horrid, it's been called America's first sin. I urge you to read the resolution and then reread it, because this resolution is an example of exactly what local jurisdictions across the United States should be doing to address this pressing national issue. The Office of Equity stands ready to provide leadership and assistance in this endeavor. Most of us, true patriotic Americans, are striving for a more perfect union that includes all races, religions, genders, ethnicities, and everyone. This message today is not only to Black American descendants of slaves, but to every American. I'm proud today to be a part of an administration that recognizes these facts and supports H.R. 40. I'm proud of the Metro Council for taking such bold and decisive action, and I'm proud to be a Louisvillian. Thank you.
Thank you, Michael. As he said, and we agree, it's way beyond time for the commission, for cities and cities reckoning with unforgivable centuries of violence, trauma, bias, and the worst sorts of oppression that make up systemic racism. When I get into conversations with this about white folks that just don't understand it, I try to say, imagine if it was your forebears that were bought and sold Imagine if that was your wife that was ripped from your arms and sent down the river, raped along the way, and would you be cool with that? Are you okay with that? Usually I don't get much of a response. But that's what this is about. So for folks to try to whitewash this over or put some kind of conspiracy theory around this is some injustice or misleading, or white people trying to make other white people feeling bad about themselves, that's not what this is. This is about standing up to the truth and understanding that it's well beyond time for all Americans to understand that the roots of America's prosperity today are directly tied to the institutions of slavery, Jim Crow laws, redlining, and restrictive racial covenants, which created the nation's extreme wealth gap that we have today. So this resolution is a show of support. Hopefully Congress can move on it. It's been tied up in Congress for years by our friends on the other side of the aisle, the Republicans, but hopefully they can see there's some truth and justice in this as well. So now I'd like to welcome Councilman Ja'Cory Arthur to the podium. Councilman Arthur has been a great breath of fresh air for the council and many of the issues that he has led, and the strong and informed perspective that he has given to critical issues like this. Councilman?
Peace. I'd like to make 3 quick points before we sign this resolution. One being that this is the local model that I strongly urge all other municipalities to follow. We've seen reparations efforts in cities fail miserably because people simply do not understand that the federal government is the only institution that can pay this debt. In fact, my favorite estimate in terms of what we're talking about when we think about reparations is from a professor in California who added up all of the slaves, all of the wages, and all of the interest over these years and estimated 19 to 20 trillion solely based on those factors, excluding segregation, Jim Crow, excluding ongoing discrimination, just solely based on slave wages and interest, 19 to 20 trillion. When you do the math in the city of Louisville, that is tens of billions of dollars that will come to this community for the descendants alone. Our city budget is barely, our entire city budget is barely $1 billion. So if you are advocating for local reparations efforts, you're advocating for chump change, and you're not advocating for the full debt that is owed to you and your ancestors. In fact, if you added up all of the city budgets and the state budgets across the entire country, we're talking less than $4 trillion. Compare that to the 19 to 20 trillion that should be paid over time to the descendants. The second point that I'd like to make is that, as you heard, this is long overdue. And not only is it overdue, we have been skipped, we have been stepped on, we've been stepped around. If you read the resolution, you'll see a few examples of reparative justice, of reparations that have been provided to groups, specific groups such as Japanese Americans, Native Americans, even Jewish Americans who never suffered the atrocity of the Holocaust on American soil, and slave owners received reparations. But for some reason, over the course of hundreds of years, we have never received what is owed to us, the debt that is owed to us. This resolution is saying that we, without a doubt, support that this repair must be made. And then the last point I'd like to make is that this is the solution. We often sit around and talk about and act like we have no idea why the so-called 9th Street divide exists, why the West End or any historically black community is in the condition that it is in, why we have violence within our communities, and I'm talking structural violence. We oftentimes wonder what the solution is. We are a wealthless group across this country, in a country that we were forced to build and never paid for. The only solution is wealth. Wealth was stolen, wealth must be returned. And until we do that, through the federal government, through a reparations package, the wealth gap across this country won't close, the wealth gap across this state won't close, and the wealth gap in the city of Louisville definitely won't close. So this is the model. This is long overdue, and this is the only solution to the race problem in the United States of America. Let's sign this thing.
All right, so thank you, Councilman Arthur. I want to also thank Councilwoman Paula McCraney. The two of them sponsored this resolution, and another signed on, so it's a great day for our city and a great statement, so let's sign this resolution. Okay, so the title of this is a resolution relating to the support of federal reparations legislation and the purpose of House Resolution 40 of the 117th Congress. And as Michael MEEKS said, our Chief Equity Officer, this just didn't come up in Congress last week. It's been lingering for decades. So we're happy to sign our city's support on this here today. All right, it's official. Any questions?
When will the study here begin? After you sign it, what's the next step?
Okay. Yeah, so this is strictly a resolution saying we support what's going on in Washington, D.C. in Congress and urging them to pass the bill. We discuss issues around equity all many days, and obviously our budget is full of equitable decisions as well. So, Councilman, you want to add some?
Also add, as I talked about it being a model, there are organizations across this country who are working in their cities to push forward similar resolutions, and that's really important because people oftentimes on the internet talk about reparations being a pipe dream or how reparations is long overdue. It's not going to happen from a couple tweets. You have to actually engage people. You have to actually push forward. You have to actually pressure politicians who are making the decisions about reparations. So next step for me personally as a member of the American Descendants of Slavery is to introduce similar resolutions across this country to continue to send that message and put President Biden, Vice President Kamala Harris, and all congressional leadership on notice that they need to move forward on this as soon as possible.
Mayor Fischer, since this has been around before, why was now the time that Louisville decided, yes, we're going to support this, we're going to sign this, and what had to come into play to make this happen today?
I think we had council leadership and Councilman Arthur and Councilwoman McCraney that said they wanted to take this issue up, and they had worked with their council colleagues to get the votes for it to pass. I've been eager to sign it for quite some time, so it just took the right people at the right time, and I really commend them for their leadership and leading the community discussion around this. As you can see, there's still a lot of confusion around people with what they think this is all about. This is really just about studying something that should have been studied a long time ago and coming up with suggestions on how repair can be done.